What's going on, everybody? It is that time again. The Sooners Illustrated Podcast, episode 155 on this Thursday, February 20th, 2025. Josh Callaway, Collin Kennedy with his new water cup.
R.I.P. to the mason jar, man. We lost a good soldier last week.
That cup, you're set. You could not refill that for a couple podcasts. That's a heavy duty.
You got to stay hydrated, brother. You know, we're in the middle of podcasting in camp season. Even if it's 12 degrees, you got to make sure the fluids are flowing.
No doubt. Coming off a big weekend in Dallas, so make sure you're replenished. On Thursdays, we talk recruiting. Collin was at Under Armour Dallas over the weekend. A lot to get to, a lot of high-profile prospects, both on the offensive side of the football and defensive. Got a 4-star tackle we're going to talk about, a couple of an edge rusher and a linebacker. We got some big names that we're going to get into in just a little bit, along with a medley of others. It's a loaded recruiting show, as it typically is on a Thursday with our guy Collin Kennedy here. A lot to get to from Under Armour Dallas. But, Collin, before we get there, I want to bring up, I think what's kind of the hot topic right now among OU fans. I figured you have a good perspective on it, so let's do it. Admittedly, it's a loaded question, but we'll try and sift through it in a reasonably timed manner as best we can, because we could go hours on this if we needed to. Does OU have the support to win the SEC? And I bring this up because it's kind of twofold. Obviously, right now, everyone sees what's happening on the basketball side, and there's a major conversation going on about, does OU basketball have the NIL needed to compete? Does it have the fan support needed to compete? Dari Noka, who's obviously an OU alum over on the ESPN SEC Network, kind of got everyone, they got the fan base into a tizzy, over the weekend when, he went on SEC Network and talked about how the LNC crowds are so much lacking compared to everywhere else in the SEC, and how he feared more of the same was going to happen in baseball. So, Collin, again, it's a loaded question. It's something we could talk about for hours probably, but does OU have the support it needs in the SEC? And that means both from a fan perspective as well as, NIL and elsewhere, financial support. In your mind, because that's the big question that we jokingly said all the time, is OU going to be SEC ready? And it was kind of a joke, but it's also kind of not a joke. This is the most competitive athletics conference that there is in America. For you, when I ask that question, where did your mind go first? And what's your initial reaction to it? I mean, does Oklahoma have the things in place, fans elsewhere, to win at a high level in the SEC in not just football, but a lot of sports?
Yeah, and I think it's relevant, too, to mention on the heels of all of this talk about fan support and NIL and fiscal support for the athletic programs and facilities arm races.
Yeah.
Athletic Director Joe Castiglione sends out an email as social media is ablaze, essentially calling on the fans to help the university and its athletic department with the pending revenue share model, and kind of calling on the fan base to increase support financially as we get ready to head into this new era of college athletics.
And this is after a winter portal period where obviously they got the big name John Mateer, but a lot of people felt like OU wasn't in on the highest priced guys as well. That's another backdrop on it. Yeah.
And it got out that Oklahoma wasn't the highest bidder for John Mateer either. And
right.
This is all kind of combining to pose the question. I almost wonder if the question is like, does Oklahoma have the support financially or atmosphere-wise to succeed in the SEC? Was it a mistake? I've seen some people out there asking, like, is Oklahoma really a fit for the future of the Southeastern Conference, which is essentially now taking over partially the world of college football. I don't know if you saw the news that came out recently too, Josh, but the SEC and the Big Ten kind of just said, look, we're taking over the playoff model. Like, we're going to go ahead and decide
calling the shots. Yeah.
How the future of this sport looks. And like, man, if you're Oklahoma, you really have to start looking inward and asking yourself whether or not you are ready to be part of essentially one of the two governing bodies in college athletics. And it's really hard to answer this question, especially in like a rapid fashion. But for me, I think where I would go is just saying, I don't know that you can definitively answer this given the current context of Oklahoma's athletic department with what's to come.
Yeah.
And why I say that, I don't want to make it sound like what I'm saying is that what we saw from Oklahoma football in 2024 was a one-off type of thing. But I do personally believe that there were a lot of uncontrollables that were out of the hands of the football program, the fan base, that led to some struggles on the field that maybe are now kind of creating this wayward expectation. And if you'll remember, like Oklahoma is catching a lot of flack, but OU's fan base received a ton of praise for its in-game atmosphere, especially in the SEC opener, creating one of the loudest decibel levels that the ESPN ABC primetime crew had recorded over the past couple of years. Oklahoma had a relatively talented football team, but when you lose players to injury, you have players who are not meeting expectation level. There were poor decisions made, and it all kind of combined for this type of season we have not seen before. And it then trickles into what's really kind of spurned all this, which is the men's basketball program, right, and the collapse that we have seen for OU on the hardwood after another relatively successful start to a season. And then you get into this conference play debut, and it's been, I mean, what is it, 5 games in a row now lost?
5, and 4 of them were complete blowouts, not even competitive.
So here's why I bring all this up. When you consider these kind of one-off instances of performance, and yet in some instances it's not impacting the fan base, and in other instances it is very much the fan base saying, why would we support this? With the incoming revenue share model and everything that entails relative to how you are spending money, how the University of Oklahoma, after recording, Josh, I don't want to say a record, but a new high in revenue garnered from the athletic department. I don't know that you can answer this question based off of 1 year in the SEC. I think when you look at OU basketball, I understand some of the frustration from individuals like Dari Noka and so on about maybe some of the fan support, but at the same time, like I want the fans to know I'm kind of on their side as well. Like I personally, as someone who has to cover the Wild West that is recruiting, I feel like I am somewhat similar to fans out there saying, why on earth would this current product, considering everything that it's going to cost me, time and money, why would that receive my support right now? Why would this be something that I should be drawn to? Because it's a very fair thing to say. The football side of it, I do think you can really kind of get into the in-depth argument of, is there enough going? Is there enough backing? Are you truly ready to be compared to some of these other SEC brands? Especially because, like, the other day during the VIP chat, I was asked about Ole Miss and Oklahoma compared to Ole Miss, and I think there's a debate there in terms of investment. I think where I'm at is I do think that Oklahoma has the infrastructure to be successful in this conference. I think you need to define what success is in the SEC, and I think you need to know what success is in the SEC with a new wave of college football changes on the horizon. What is that supposed to look like? Yeah, I don't know that you know the answer, but I think if you do the right things and you give this fan base enough and you are capitalizing on what you're doing in the athletic department to turn in revenue and generate profits and prepare yourself properly for the future, I do believe that there is enough in place for Oklahoma to hang tough and assert itself as a true member of the Southeastern Conference. I don't know that you can say one way or the other based off of everything we've seen this past year. I think that's a little bit too much of a variable or maybe an exception to make it the rule. In general, while I do think there's a lot there, I know that a lot can be bettered. I know a lot can be improved. I personally, though, really believe, especially if you make a few changes, which we can go down that rabbit hole, Oklahoma can be successful in the SEC. And I think, honestly, once this fan base has enough behind it to really buy in, there will be a lot to look forward to as far as OU and its membership in this conference.
Yeah, well said. I think it's a little bit case by case. I do think football is mostly where it needs to be. I know it had a rough first go. I think the fan support is still at a really high level. Owen Field is always packed. I've only gone through this conference one time, traveling to the road games, but OU fans, they still travel as well as anyone. I think of the trips to Auburn and to Ole Miss, how much Crimson were in the stands for those games. It was a lot. There was a lot of OU fans making those trips. So I think football is mostly okay. I get that there's this thought process and there was this belief after the winter portal period that they were bargain shopping a lot of the time with some of the guys they brought in. Mm. Some of that is a little bit of trying to find good value. That's a little bit of OU's approach, but that's a chosen approach by a lot. They're not going to go above market value. That's something that they have chosen to do. Not so that they couldn't do, but they chose to do. And again, we talked about before, it's not flashy because it's not going and getting a new shiny toy, but they stepped up to pay to keep R. Mason Thomas, to keep Deion Burks, to keep Dominic Williams. Like that took money to do. So I think football-wise, Oklahoma, I don't think you can say definitively that they're not where they need to be right now for that sport. Mm. Softball, obviously, same thing. Softball's going to be just fine. Baseball, I think, truthfully, is going to be fine. I think it's in the good place. I think the investment is there. There was a lot made about the opening weekend attendance. You can miss me with that. It was freezing cold. I was at these games. If I was in the press box, if I had to sit outside, I probably would not have been at these games. It was horrific weather. It was freezing, really windy. It's going to be fine. OU Baseball put out before the season that they sold, I think it was 60% more season tickets this year than any other season than the previous high or whatever it was. Like the investment is there. Now their facilities need massive upgrades, but those are coming. Those are coming. The donations have been made, maybe even a new ballpark down the road. Like the investment is there. Obviously, Oklahoma just stepped up. Everyone remembers last summer to keep Skip Johnson when he had other suitors in the SEC. They found the money. So I think baseball-wise, it's in an okay place. It's moving in the right direction. And
I want to point out, too, that you've seen some new NIL partnerships and agreements emerge related specifically to OU baseball, which in terms of the SEC, Josh, as you know, you need to have that buttoned up as well from a talent acquisition standpoint. You've seen that emerge on the baseball front.
Yeah. So I think baseball, I really think is in the right direction. There's a lot of momentum for that program right now. I think the crowds are going to be great this season, maybe even next weekend when the weather gets a little better, but I especially think in SEC play. Eldon Mitchell, it's limited. It's not, you can't get 10,000 people in there. It's like 3,500 capacity, but it will be packed. Yeah. I strongly believe that. Basketball, though, I have more concerns. I do. I don't know if Oklahoma has the investment right now, specifically in men's basketball. Women's basketball is a little bit different. It's a little easier to retain your team. Jaden Bronchek has had the benefit of that. I think of even this year for Porter Moser, how different would things be if they had just been able to keep Otega Owa, J.V. McCollum, and John Hughley, we'll say, to the guys they added this year. That's nothing. That's just guys who were literally on the team in the last 2 years. But they lost everyone again because they're not able to retain their players at a very high level right now. When other programs come calling, like a Kentucky for Otega Owa or Houston for Milo Suzon, they're not able to step up and retain them. So I have questions there. And, you and I have been around the basketball program for a long time. We both went to OU. We covered the team. It's been a long time. I've never seen the fan base as apathetic about basketball as they are right now. It just it shocks me how much I see online OU fans say things like, take the money from basketball and invest it in football, put it in baseball, put it in softball. Like
softball, yeah.
There's people that legitimately think that way. Like it's not even worth it to try. Like just give up on it. Accept that basketball is what it is. That's a scary place to be in. Because while that sounds ridiculous, people say that, and if fans are saying that online, there are certainly probably big money donors that probably feel that way too. So that's scary. Men's hoops is in a scary spot. I don't know if they have what they need, fans and otherwise, to turn it around. And maybe if they make a coaching change, maybe that sparks something. I don't know. But
I think it does.
So it does. But that's one sport that I have genuine concerns moving forward.
I want to say this. We're asking, like, do they have the support? One of the best ways to reinvigorate a fan base and generate revenue and regenerate interest and spark an influx of investment financially or support wise is to make a change. And I would argue that even before Oklahoma's transition into the SEC, there was apathy. And now you've seen this. And I don't know that while basketball pretty much sparked this conversation, again, I don't think you can evaluate the basketball program specifically with 100% accuracy right now either. Because I genuinely do believe if you told me that we wake up tomorrow or we end this podcast today and Oklahoma makes a change and they go get a Sampson or whoever, you cannot convince me there wouldn't be this newfound support that everyone's kind of looking for, right? Like suddenly I think Oklahoma basketball would have the attention again. It would have the eyes necessary, would have the investment necessary to spark some conversations. And in general, like, let's just be honest. How many athletic departments in America are like Oklahoma in that quite literally, like you mentioned, I've said this on a couple other shows, I don't know very many others where there are legitimately, no joke, a lot of people out there saying, sure, men's basketball may be a revenue drawing sport, but I'd rather pay that money to the softball program before I even think about men's basketball.
Right.
At the very least, you make it a conversation if you make a change. And that's why I think, to me too, it's like everyone's ragging on the fans or whatever else. And it's like, you can have that, but you have to kind of see it through the fan base's lens of like, well, give me a reason. Give me something to be excited about. And there just isn't something exciting. How often at this point are OU beat members excited to go cover the games?
Yeah.
I don't know. I sympathize with the fan base heavily in this instance. And I think in general, it's like you can't argue whether or not Oklahoma definitely does or does not have what it needs in place to be successful in the SEC, especially with like a basketball program, because we don't know the fullest form yet. They have not taken steps necessary to really get closer to the support that's needed, if that makes sense. And I hope that that's at least being taken under consideration as, for lack of a better term, the darkness continues to creep on that front with the basketball program.
No doubt. And like you said, to reiterate the point you made earlier, I talked about the crowd. The crowds have not been good at the LNC this year. I don't disagree with the fan. Like I said, like you said, I sympathize with the fans, like that are not coming out, and it's competitive. And look, the elephant in the room too that people bring up all the time: the Oklahoma City Thunder are right down the road, one of the best teams in the NBA right now, if not the best. They play a very entertaining product of basketball. It's at a nicer arena for people in the city. It's closer. People in Tulsa, it's closer. Like, that's a tough competition you have. At the same time, that doesn't make it any easier. So I don't know, and like you said, it's crazy to me too, this idea of that OU basketball is what it is. It can't get like, there's been a lot of history, I think, rewritten on what OU basketball is. OU basketball is, in a lot of ways, the best program to have never won a national title. Like, it's got multiple players that are of note in the NBA right now, including two like very well-known players, and Austin Reeves and Trae Young, that like kids who follow the NBA know very well. Like, it's a program that can win and has won at a high level. So this idea that like this is just what it is what it is. This is what it's always been. It's a mediocre program. Like that's not true. It's just not true. So I don't know. A lot of questions. Like I said, we could talk about this for hours, but I don't know. We'll see. And basketball's back home this weekend, Saturday against Mississippi State. Who knows what the crowd will be like for that? There was just such a skepticism for this team from the very beginning. I brought it before, but the SEC home opener against Texas A&M, who is number 10, and it's A&M, a natural rival that we haven't seen in a decade at the LNC. Yeah, OU was 13-1 at the time. The crowd was not good, and that was an eyebrow raiser for me that night. It was like, oh, we have real problems that they couldn't get people here for this game. And of course, OU had the big lead and blew it. Doesn't help. We'll see. Got to win. At the end of the day, you win, it solves all. But can you win? It's a chicken and the egg. Can you win without the support? Like what comes first?
Yeah.
We shall see.
I sure miss the days of Buddy Hield and those groups playing in the LNC and you and I sitting in that arena, and there's not an empty seat in the house, man.
I watch a lot of college basketball. I love college basketball, and I watch these games in the SEC. I'm watching Alabama, Missouri last night, and man, that crowd in Columbia was just on fire. And it was, I yearned for it through the TV. Like, how great would it be? We have not had even one game like that at the LNC this year. We'll see. It's a loaded conversation, and we'll have more about it, I'm sure, for months to come. And we'll continue to monitor.
I did want to say this before we transition.
Sure.
I think the other part of this too is like the financial support and whatever else is like the thing that's really going to have to be recalibrated for Oklahoma is what are you planning to invest in? Because I think for years it was all about the facilities arms race. And I think whether you talk about OU basketball or OU baseball or OU football, there's still very much a need to upgrade in facilities. Very much a need. And that's not me just saying that. That's me talking to people in those programs, in the athletic department, and that being a primary goal. But several conversations I have with folks too in the collegiate athletic space is the sacrifice of the arms race because of name, image, and likeness, revenue sharing, and making sure athletes are taken care of financially so that the number one thing that you need, which is talent, is taken care of. I think that's another subtle layer to this equation as we talk about baseball getting a new field and OU basketball's constant fight for this new arena that it just, honestly, it feels like it may never come, right? And
that's so good. No.
We're seeing these projections about a new press box at Gaylord Family Stadium and talking about new facilities for the football program. And yet a lot of the support conversations are centered around more going after a John Mateer and making sure you're the highest bidder and making sure that the OU basketball program can go out and pay a high-level big man what's necessary in an extremely competitive NIL space, which is college basketball recruiting. I don't even know that OU fans know how crazy the college basketball recruiting NIL space is relative to the amount of money that's spent there, right? I think that's the other thing, too, is like we're talking about OU, does it have enough to succeed or to put in place for success? And it's like Oklahoma is going to have to figure out, too, what's more important. And it has to honestly be the athletic space. And I know that there's going to be this debate, too, about, well, how do you make sure you're funneling enough money into these facilities, upgrades, and whatever else? It's like that's another part of this that we're going to have to start really kind of accepting and coming to terms with, is that you may not necessarily see Oklahoma have these premier facilities, at least for a while, as the athletic department adjusts to this new landscape and how much money you have to dedicate to the players who are actually on the field or on the hardwood. So I don't know, something else that I've just been thinking about a lot over the last few months.
No doubt. And there's a lot of layers to it. Like I said, we could go for a while on this, but we'll see. And basketball is one of those programs that just feels like it's a little bit of kind of floating out in the water, lost its way a little right now. And can they get back on track? All that is the funny thing too, is that depending on where you look, they're still in the tournament. The season ended today, which is kind of bananas, but so is the nature of the schedule that they've played in the SEC, which is just as if it already was the best football conference. It has been for years. It's been far and away the best baseball conference has been for years. It's the best basketball conference now too. Go figure. Let's talk some recruiting. So you were in Dallas over the weekend, obviously in your neck of the woods, at Under Armour Dallas. Our own Blake and Koviak joined you down there. We hope to get him on the show today. Couldn't quite make the schedules work. He'll be on. Everyone get to meet him on the show in due time. He's doing great work, and he's got a lot of content coming and on the site already, but still to come over at Sooners Illustrated, Oklahoma.247sports.com. Collin as well. We've got a number of big name guys we want to get into that. I'll kind of open up like the notebook for you. Let's start on the offensive line, a guy we have talked about before 4-star offensive tackle Felix Ojo, Mansfield product. This is our number 6 offensive tackle in the class, top 30 player overall in the class. He good. The succinct analysis there. We saw Felix at camp last summer. Collin, obviously you got to see him. He put on a show, it sounded like, down there in Dallas, and you got to talk to him about Oklahoma a little bit. I guess kind of lay out how he did and how you feel like things are kind of shaking out with OU pursuing the services for this guy. Who is he got? You could speak to it far, but I mean, I'm asking, could he get to 5-star level? I mean, this is a really good player, obviously.
For all intents and purposes, this is a 5-star.
Right.
He's number 29 in the country, which puts him in 5-star territory. Obviously, our network has yet to finalize the top 32, which is all of the 5-star grades. Right. But at number 29 now, and then going back to Sunday's action, we named him the alpha dog of the camp. I don't think there was any debate. He was far and away the best player there. This is someone that all of us at 24/7 Sports adore. I mean, this arguably is like everyone's favorite player in the state of Texas right now. Mm-hmm. And I think it not only goes back to what he did Sunday, but then what he did when we invited him to the Navy All-American Bowl. And like, I don't even think I told this story, but we were told that he was the first player as a junior to ask for a playbook, which blew us away. It's like all of these guys are around and he's part of a class that really shouldn't be there in an all-star setting. And he was the guy that asked the coaching staff, hey, let me see the playbook. Let me start studying. Let me start getting ready for the game.
Yeah.
Beyond that, has a stellar junior season, summer camp action. You saw him. He was incredible. He continues to add weight. He's getting bigger, stronger, and yet he's a legitimate 6'6", 6'7", around 275 pounds, incredible arm length, and dominated. Again, I'm telling you right now, I think this is a 5-star. And he will be. Long and short of it is this is Oklahoma's number 1 offensive tackle target in 2026, and he has been for a while. The new update is that he told me, first, he's probably going to book 6 official visits. In the spring, he hasn't booked a ton of trips, but he said he wanted to see some places he hadn't necessarily seen before so that he can really evaluate them for the summer official visit slate. He'll probably be at Florida, Ole Miss, and Notre Dame, if I remember correctly. The top 2, he told me, is Texas and Ohio State. And then the subtle nugget that he gave to myself and Greg Powers, my buddy over at Dave Campbell's Texas Football, the sleeper program now emerging even outside of his top 8 that he recently dropped is Colorado. So Deion Sanders and the Buffs starting to hover a little bit. So there's a lot going on. All that to say, the natural question, how or where does Oklahoma fit into all this with its number 1 target at a position like offensive tackle? Well, Texas and Ohio State are in tier 1. Texas already has its official visit booked, I believe, for June 13th weekend. Ohio State's still figuring a lot of stuff out, but I fully expect the Buckeyes to not only get on the OV slate, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them kind of push for that last weekend of the official visit stretch.
Yeah.
I was told that Oklahoma is in tier 2 right now, probably alongside the likes of like a Michigan. And I do think it's worth noting, as things currently constructed, the only in-state program for Ojo in his top 8, him being from Mansfield, Texas, is Texas. So A&M did not make the cut. Oklahoma is essentially de facto probably the closest program to where he resides. So OU in tier 2, I fully expect them, and he told me as much. They will get an official visit out of the 6. He's got to go from pretty much a top 9 down to 6 official visits. I think OU is one of the 4 programs firmly in the mix for an OV. As things stand today, I think Texas is the leader. I think Ohio State is going to go as hard as it can after Ojo in the summer. And I think Oklahoma is really going to have to, as we just talked about, allocation of funds or whatever else. I think Oklahoma is really going to have to ask itself, after winning the Michael Fasusi sweepstakes and winning out on a player like Ryan Foje, how much is it willing to be aggressive in the pursuit of a talent like Ojo, who is elite, like elite player? But when we talk about programs like Texas and Ohio State, let's just call it what it is, folks. Those folks throw money around.
Yeah.
I think the storyline for Oklahoma going in relation to its number one offensive tackle target in 2026, after landing its number one and number two targets in 2025, and then getting ready to compete with other programs at the highest level, not just on the field, but off the field, if you will. It's clear to me that while OU is in tier 2 and it overtook people in tier 1 before, if you'll remember how things played out with Fasusi, Oklahoma is going to have to go into the summer really asking itself, does it want to do that again? I don't know the answer to the question just yet, but that's kind of the storyline for me in relation to Ojo coming out of Sunday.
Just good old-fashioned big boy recruiting battle. It sounds like. I mean, it's a really good offensive tackle. Like you said, probably a future 5-star, a legit player that, you know, is one of those classes, kind of like Fasusi, or, you know, one of those players that you kind of build your class around, and all the big guys are in on them. It's kind of one of those fun recruitments to watch, because it's just, like I said, high priority position, big brands, blue bloods. It's fun. And we saw Felix a little bit at camp last summer. So that was not a full year ago, but 8 months ago or whatever. And he was a man child then. So I can only imagine he's just going to continue to progress and get bigger. And you know, this is a big time player, obviously. It's exciting.
I mean, he's one of my favorites, but I think the other part of this too, the layers to all this equation, as we've talked about, 2026, I think the consensus is that it's a lesser talented cycle than 2025. And it's lesser talented than what 2027 will be, which places even more emphasis on a player like Ojo, who I think not only is he, I don't want to speak in absolutes, not only is he in the running to be the number one offensive lineman in the state of Texas, I think this is someone who genuinely now is on track to compete for the number one offensive tackle rating in 2026 class nationally. Put that into context, the pressure is on for every program involved.
And after Oklahoma just got the number one offensive tackle in 2025, what if you go back to back? A lot of work to do, but exciting guy to continue to monitor. And we will talk about, I assume, a lot between now and December. Let's go over to defense. Kevin Ford Jr., 4-star edge, another obviously high priority position edge rusher. He's our number 11 edge in the class, number 111 overall player at Duncanville, which is obviously a program that comes up on the show quite often, produces, Power 5 level players all the time. Collin, for you, it seemed like, just kind of reading the tea leaves, that there's been a lot of OU momentum here. Is that how you kind of sense it as well? And how did KJ Ford, as you term him usually, how did he do down in Dallas, and what's kind of the latest there?
Yeah, so he looked really good, and I think, honestly, Oklahoma leads here. And he has Alabama, Oklahoma, Texas A&M official visits book. I think he just dropped before we were hopping on the show that he is going to officially visit Auburn, which is not a program that he's necessarily mentioned a ton to me and a few other folks down here in the South Central. I don't have the date on that because I looked at the graphic and it didn't have a date. But Auburn getting in the mix for an OV is notable alongside the likes of Bama, OU, and A&M. He told me that USC is in the mix as well. Obviously, the Trojans like to come into the state of Texas and try and compete for top-notch players. USC has been involved with him and a few others. But I think Oklahoma – here's what I find interesting with KJ Ford, because we talked about it a lot, like OU's prioritizing him or whatever else. Here's kind of the thing I want to go back to. I know I've talked about this before with KJ, but the assumption a long time ago was that he was going to go to Texas, right? He was playing in a whole bunch of Texas gear. I talk about this all the time. His buddy Collin Simmons, his former teammate, the edge rusher who was opposite of him at Duncanville, 5-star player, goes to the Longhorns. Everyone just kind of put those puzzle pieces together. I think the new headline coming out of Sunday, Josh, honestly, is that he kind of told all of us at Under Armour Dallas that Texas is out of it. I don't even think the Longhorns are in the mix anymore.
Yeah.
So now you're like, all right, well, who's going to take that top spot? And I really do believe that Oklahoma's in the driver's seat. I think Miguel Chavis has done an excellent job. We talk a lot about how OU just can't get it done in Duncanville, right? Like it's been
right.
It feels like a decade of just Oklahoma struggling. And even when they do pull off a win like a Savion Byrd, it doesn't pan out the way that it needs to. I think that Oklahoma, especially because he is booked for the June 20th official visit weekend, which will be the Champion Barbecue, it really feels like the Sooners have a shot to close on KJ Ford if everything goes according to their plan. Now, I think A&M's definitely going to have a say. Alabama's getting talked about a lot here. I mean, a lot. And Alabama, I believe, is the first on his official visit slate. I think they're on the books for the May 30th weekend. So the Crimson Tide, kind of a sleeper. I couldn't tell you much about Auburn. I don't know. But I know that OU is feeling really good about where it stands. And KJ Ford, especially with essentially saying Texas is out, OU kind of climbing back in. I think the Sooners are ready for the summer to arrive, if you pick up my drift.
No doubt. Miguel Chavis, we talked about it a little bit on Monday's show because we did defensive end stats report. Miguel Chavis continues to have been kind of sneaky, just a great hire by Brent. Yeah. Obviously, he's a guy who hadn't been a position coach before, coming over from Clemson, and there was a little bit of kind of, he's the new guy, right? He hasn't really done it at a high level, unlike a Todd Bates or someone like that. And his position continues to get better and deeper, and it's got elite level talent in this year's room, recruiting well, in on guys like KJ Ford. Just lots to like with what Miguel Chavis has done. So credit to him, and obviously work to be done here, but it sounds like OU's in a good place. And like you said, kind of breaking through and getting one of those high-level players from Duncanville it was nice too. Staying on defense, Daquives Beck, 4-star linebacker. He's our number 9 linebacker in the class, number 151 overall from Carthage, Texas. Obviously, Oklahoma didn't have a linebackers coach until very recently, with Nate Dreiling coming aboard after Zach Alley left and that whole kind of middle period. For you, Collin, this is not a name I don't think we've talked about yet on the show. Maybe we have, maybe just kind of in passing. Maybe last week you might have brought him up.
Correct.
What's kind of the sentiment with Beck here, and what kind of a player is he? And does Oklahoma have a real shot at landing him? And kind of tying into what I was just asking, like who's kind of doing the recruiting here? Is it Brent Venables? How does that kind of work when there's been so much kind of transition with Oklahoma's linebacker staff? Wes Goodwin now obviously in the mix at linebacker too.
All right, so here's why I'm really excited, and here's why we have not been able to talk about Daquives Beck much here on the show. So if the name Carthage, Texas sounds familiar, it is the same high school program that Oklahoma pulled another elite linebacker in Kip Lewis.
Right.
And if you'll remember on our show that we recorded when I was covering the Texas State Championship games, Carthage, I believe it just won the state title, and Daquives Beck was named defensive MVP of the game. And I kind of threw out there like, hey, Carthage has some pretty good linebackers.
That's right. That's right.
I don't know 100% if this was a Zach Alley thing, but I personally had been, I'll just say what it is. I've been pretty frustrated about this situation. Daquives Beck, again, same place that Oklahoma pulled a player like Kip Lewis, talented linebacker, number 151 in the country. The likes of Texas A&M, so on and so forth, were in the mix. I don't think that he's like the tallest, most toolsy player. He's muscled up. He looks like an inside linebacker. He's an awesome player to watch. I encourage people to check out his film.
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma had been in contact with Daquives Beck for a long time. And to my knowledge, I think it was primarily Zach Alley. But they had not offered for whatever reason, and yet we're still like inviting him to the Red River game when he had a Texas offer and did not have an Oklahoma offer. And I couldn't make any sense of the situation. Right. And so even as recently as a few weeks ago, I checked in with Daquives. A couple of us checked in with Daquives. He was going to visit Oklahoma ended up not being able to. Still hadn't heard much as far as an offer. Obviously, a ton to do with that was Zach Alley being out. Now it sounds like with some staff turnover and people like Nate Dreiling and Wes Goodwin coming in and really kind of taking the reins again on the linebacker recruiting scene, similar to kind of what I've talked about with like a Ben Arbuckle coming in and really liking a player like Rylan Morris.
Yeah.
It seems like there's almost kind of this newfound interest in a player like Daquives Beck, and it makes too much sense to me as far as why you would go after this guy. So he gets his Oklahoma offer fairly recently. I fist pumped. I was pumped for the guy because I know that he's been wanting that one for a while. He's going to take not an official visit. He's going to take a spring visit to Oklahoma for the Future Freaks event on March 8th. So he'll be in Norman now with an offer. And on top of that, he told me that as long as everything goes well and he gets the feedback that he needs to from OU staff, he'll probably put Oklahoma on the official visit slate. So we haven't been able to talk about Daquives Beck much, but from some connections to the caliber of talent, the position that he plays, and now some of the interest that's being built here, it's very cool to kind of see some of OU's newer hires come in and start to get aggressive with a really talented inside linebacker prospect who has an affinity for the program. And I think over the next few weeks, if Oklahoma really take care of business, and to my knowledge, if Brent Venables really gets involved here, Oklahoma and Daquives Beck could be a very real thing. Mm-hmm. And so I'm excited to track this race. Daquives Beck is really excited to visit Oklahoma on March 8th. So this is a name to know moving forward. And this linebacker-centric staff, even with some new faces coming in, they've got a real shot to make some noise with a player who, again, named defensive MVP while winning a state championship in Texas.
Like you said, you went down to the last time you went to this well, it's worked out pretty well with old Kip Lewis. So it's an interesting name to know, and we'll keep an eye on that one as another fun name on the defensive side for Oklahoma. Let's shift to 2027. Never too early to talk quarterbacks, of course.
Yeah.
Peyton Houston, a guy that we have talked about before on the show, Louisiana product, not yet rated from 24/7 Sports. That's coming in due time. Obviously, still early for him. We saw Peyton at camp last summer. Looked really good. We talked about that at the time. Obviously, Oklahoma's in on – they have Jaden O'Neal committed already in 2026. We talked about Bo Bentley in 26. But Peyton Houston in 2027, Collin, I only got to see him the one time in shorts, but he looked great. And guys like you, people whose opinions I trust, basically, this kid is legit. How did he do in Dallas? And what's kind of the sentiment with Oklahoma pursuing him and making him their 2027 quarterback? Because this is just a name that continues to, it feels like, get a lot of momentum. And every time I see anything online clips, it's just the arm talent is obvious. This is a kid that's very, very exciting. What's kind of the latest there with him?
Very few can see the ball jump out of their hands quite like Peyton Houston, if I'm honest with you.
For sure.
Now, for those that are kind of curious, like the elevator pitch from a scouting perspective on Peyton Houston is like, this may not be the most traitsy player. He's probably 5'10", 5'11", 180 pounds, 170 pounds. I have to go back and see what he weighed in at Under Armour. But on top of not necessarily being the most toolsy quarterback in the country, the floor here is as high as you will find, because I don't know that there are very many who have like a genuine laser arm like Peyton Houston. When he wants to, he can get the ball out of his hand and into the receiver's hand as quickly, as, for lack of a better term, violently, and yet as accurately as anybody. And he impressed again on Sunday. I want to make this abundantly clear. Like, not only is this Oklahoma's number one target at quarterback in 2027, like this is the guy that they want.
Yeah.
Everyone you talk to inside the program walls about this player gushes. I mean, they're all in on this kid, and you can understand why, because of just the very natural arm talent that he brings to the table. There's layers to this and why I wanted to talk about Peyton Houston, because you always have to emphasize the quarterback recruiting stuff. So let's go big picture, right? Let me really nerd out as a recruiting guy. Folks, the biggest storyline that maybe OU fans aren't necessarily all that familiar with, but that is huge for us as recruiting folks, is that the 2027 recruiting cycle, specifically in the state of Louisiana at the quarterback position, might end up ultimately shaping the entire class. Here's why. The number one player in the country in 2027 for us is a quarterback from the state of Louisiana. His name is Elijah Haven. He is a monster. 6'4", 190 pounds, 24/7, quite literally put the stamp on him before a lot of schools did. And now it's like, oh, goodness, this guy's a monster. You've got that guy in the state of Louisiana, number one player, number one quarterback. Peyton Houston, who is being pursued by the likes of not just LSU, kind of like Elijah Haven, but Texas, Miami, Tennessee, Oklahoma, so on and so forth. Elijah Haven.
Impressive. Georgia's in there, Michigan. I was just looking at Ole Miss. Like you said, Tennessee, Texas has an offer.
Yep. He mentioned Georgia as well as kind of one of his top schools. This is the other guy I wanted to mention, and he was there at the camp as well. Elijah Haven was. Malachi Ziegler is someone who we have a 4-star grade on early on in the 2027 cycle. He is another state of Louisiana 2027 quarterback.
What's going on?
6'3", 190 pounds, and he won the MVP of the camp at the quarterback position. These three are intertwined, whether they like it or not. And not only do you have like the natural LSU cloud hanging over all three of them, right? Sure. Which one is LSU going to go all in on? Where are they all going to go? Like who out of state wise is going to go all in on these players and win these races? Because several programs are not only already involved, but like in the case of like a Malachi Ziegler, I'm telling you right now, like that dude is going to explode on the recruiting scene. If it were me in OU's recruiting offices, especially after talking to Peyton Houston, I'd be going, hey, man, we probably need to offer Malachi Ziegler right now. Peyton Houston has the offer. I would put Oklahoma right now, kind of talking to him and reading some tea leaves. I think OU, for its top 2027 quarterback target, is in tier 2. I think you have to obviously acknowledge LSU, but I think Texas really likes this player. I think Georgia is hovering. I think Tennessee is hovering. I think Miami is hovering. You've got a lot of programs that have essentially shown you they see this quarterback dynamic in the state of Louisiana. They see a really talented player in Peyton Houston, and they are ready to go. Yeah. They're ready to essentially force LSU to show its hand, and they want to go after this quarterback. If Oklahoma is going to pursue Peyton Houston, not just in the state of Louisiana in that kind of quarterback trio, but in general in 2027, like buckle up. I do think he's going to be in Norman in March, from what he was kind of telling me. I think he might be there for future freaks. OU's really going to have to establish whether or not it's prepared to pursue Peyton Houston, because we're only in the beginning stages of Peyton Houston's recruitment, and it's going to get heated, especially as things get figured out with not just him, but some of the other quarterbacks who are tied at the hip to him in terms of guys like Elijah Haven, Malachi Ziegler, and so on. So fascinating stuff coming out of Sunday's camp. And he showed you again why so many programs are ready to go after this guy, including Oklahoma.
No doubt. I like Peyton as a player. The little bit I've seen, hopefully I can get a chance to see him again this coming summer. Like you said, this guy is a sophomore in high school right now, going into his junior season, and the offer sheet is very impressive. You look at the programs that are wooing him and making him a priority as their quarterback. It's he's one of them. He's one of them ones. He's really good and exciting to see him continue to develop and obviously grow. And he's going to be a fun name to keep an eye on for Oklahoma fans. Hopefully, a long time. Obviously around here. As far as some other stuff, obviously some other 2026 notes. We were talking on the phone playing the show yesterday, and you mentioned a lot. I mean, there was a lot of players there in Dallas. You and Blake were everywhere. And again, a lot of content over Oklahoma.247sports.com with more names. We won't be able to get to everyone on the program here, but kind of emptying the notebook here on 2026 for you as far as some other things you want to make sure you got in on the show and names you brought up.
All right, first sub-headline, Josh, 2026 wide receivers. Let's start with Mason James, Norman North, 4-star wideout. Talked to him as he was coming in. He had a really quality day, was named one of the top performers, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
He has his official visit booked for June 20th with Oklahoma. That's the only one on the books right now. He mentioned to me that he's going to visit in the spring Missouri, Kentucky, Kansas State, and I'm missing on someone else, but I know those three for sure. I think Arizona State is the other one that's really kind of amped up pursuit. I think he was just out in Tempe before the dead period, and the Sun Devils are kind of increasing interest in feeling it a little bit off of that run to the college football playoff, right? So that's kind of the core. I think Oklahoma's in the driver's seat still. I think Kansas State's going to have a shot. I don't really know yet Mizzou and Kentucky. I think Arizona State's kind of catching his interest, but I think Oklahoma remains in the driver's seat for Mason James. You have that paired with Aljor Miles, 2026 wide receiver, big body, definitely one of the top performers. This broad-shouldered, big, athletic wideout who honestly just boxed out a ton of defensive backs and pretty much won every single rep that he had on Sunday. I think Oklahoma's in the driver's seat there. He's also booked for the June 20 weekend of official visits. He has all of his OVs booked. I think OU is also leading for him. I believe coming out of Sunday, those two 2026 wide receivers, both are priority targets for Oklahoma. And in my opinion, OU is positioned well enough to feel like it's got the top spot as we prepare for spring and summer visits. Both performed very well, both kind of hinting to you that OU is in great position. Now I think it's on Oklahoma to capitalize on two prospects who impressed everyone in attendance.
Yeah, no doubt. And we've talked about, the wide receiver position being one of intrigue right now for Oklahoma as they kind of go through a bit of a roster turnover. Mason, someone that we talk about on the show all the time, obviously naturally because he's right down the road from OU and Norman North, which always kind of creates that little extra, I don't know if pressure's the right word, but a little bit of like, if we're not going to get this guy, like it stings a little more, A, if he goes somewhere else, and B, if he's great when he was literally at Norman North High School. It's just kind of the way it goes. But obviously Mason continues to be really impressive. It seems like everywhere he goes. So he's a fun one to continue to monitor. And I assume we'll see him this summer, you would imagine, at camp. We'd look forward to that.
Next sub headline here for me is some DB movement. So high 3-star defensive back Ryan Gilbert, who recently visited Oklahoma, decommitted from Texas A&M. He is also booked now for the Champion Barbecue weekend of June 20th. That will be his final official visit to my knowledge. I have talked to a lot of people in Gilbert's camp. I've known Ryan for a little bit now. I think Oklahoma's positioned in the top spot. Then there's Donovan Webb, someone who I have yet to necessarily talk about a ton. Both of these guys are relatively similar in that they're hybrid players. Donovan Webb really is kind of the safety slot nickel hybrid. Donovan Webb will visit Oklahoma in the spring, he tells me. Nothing has been booked, but OU is expected to be seeing him in Norman soon. And he's been booking some official visits. I believe the official visits he has on the books right now are Ohio State, Texas Tech, and SMU. Texas is expected to get an official visit. Oklahoma could be in the mix as well. So OU picking up some steam with a couple of DBs in 2026. And I think that they arguably lead for Gilbert. I think now they're kind of formulating their positioning here with Donovan Webb.
Webb projects as a safety?
Safety to nickel kind of guy. I think we have him listed as a corner maybe in the database, but definitely more of a safety type. And I do think that Brandon Hall has kind of been the one that's leading the charge there. Interesting
to note. So a couple of interesting DB prospects there in 2026. What about 2027? We mentioned Peyton Houston, obviously, in that 27 class. a lot of the focus on 26 right now, but like you said, there is a number of talented 27 guys in attendance at Under Armour Dallas over the weekend. What about in that class for you that stood out? Some of the guys who are, like we said with Peyton, just going to their junior high school, but the recruitments are starting to ramp up a little bit.
Yeah, the thing that I kind of want to talk about for 2027 is, and there could obviously be a lot you could point to, but I really thought that the storyline out of Sunday's camp was OU picking up steam with a lot of elite defensive back talents in the cycle. I think in 2027, you're going to see some body types and athletic ability at the safety and corner positions in the region that you just don't see in very many other instances.
Right.
And so you start with Cooper Witten. He was invited to the Under Armour All-American game, son of Jason Witten. Jason was there. Cooper continues to mention Oklahoma as one of his favorite schools alongside Tennessee and a few others. And then I think Oklahoma and 2027 cornerbacks, very interested to see how all this plays out. John Meredith III at Trinity. This is a legitimate 6'2.5" cornerback with a plus wing, huge body type. And he mentioned Oklahoma as one of his early favorites. Talon Mayo from Louisville, former teammate of guys like Michael Fasusi and Sean Hutton. Talon Mayo mentioning Oklahoma as one of his early favorites. You've got Devontre Kirkland, who Blake Antkowiak has put up a couple pieces on. He mentioned Oklahoma as one of his early favorites. He's another Tracy Toolsy defensive back. And then Montre Jackson, who had OU as one of his top three right now, who was a standout at one of OU's summer camps. He's another one, tall, long, extremely athletic, high track and field profile. OU really doing a nice job right now of getting involved with some of these rare traits and talent type corners in 2027 in the region. So I thought that was something that stood out to me in terms of 2027 guys at the camp.
No doubt. And we've seen, it's kind of funny how the way it goes where it's like each class kind of has one position group that really kind of emerges. We've seen that since we've been doing the show. Obviously, this past cycle was offensive line. In the past, it was on the defensive line, especially on the edges. And maybe it's in 2027, maybe it's the secondary, is like you said, a laundry list of noteworthy names, like you said, in the area. So you have the benefit of that. That's something that you just have to capitalize when it happens. You can't force it. It's exciting though. Exciting group of names. And
All right. Last thing for me, real quick. I know some people will ask. Zane Rowe was there, former Oklahoma commit in 2027.
Yeah.
Decommitted from OU. He picked up an Under Armour All-American game invite. Latest on him is that he acknowledges that OU is still a school in the mix for him, but he does not necessarily want to visit there anytime soon. Nothing to do really with OU, but he wants to go see the programs, which is why he decommitted from the program, right? Texas A&M, a few other really big name programs are all after this guy. He visited Texas before the dead period. I've heard the Longhorns are in really good position. I know he's going to visit Georgia in March. Georgia was a program that was heavily in the mix before he committed to Oklahoma. I think the Bulldogs are one to watch. I know Miami was a little bit in the mix too. So there's a lot going on here with Zane Rowe. And I think if OU's really going to get back in the mix for an elite talent that was committed to the program, it's got to be prepared to really kind of get back on the horse in the 2025 season, because I think Zane Rowe is getting ready to really evaluate some big name programs with high expectation levels too.
Interesting note there, no doubt, on Zane as Oklahoma maybe gets back in the mix there. So yeah, we've talked about a lot on the show the last couple of years. I think that's it. We had a lot to get to. So it was a very busy weekend in Dallas. A lot more content over on the website, oklahoma247sports.com. What's the sale right now? Do you have the exact details on it?
$1 for your first month. If you're out there and you're interested in joining the site, we are running a promo right now where if you're new to the site, you want to come join us, all you have to do is pay $1. You get a full month of access. You get to check out not only all the VIP content, the message board community, which has been awesome. You get access to all the 24/7 Sports Network. $1 gets you unlimited access to all the insider college football content you can imagine. Highly encourage folks out. If you're out there, you happen upon us on YouTube or whatever else, you want to check out 24/7 Sports, you want to check out Sooners Illustrated, $1 get you access, folks. It's a really cool opportunity to jump aboard with us right now.
What do you got to lose? It's $1. It's $1. You get a month. You try it out. You like it. You stick on. That's how you do it. No doubt.
All you have to do is put up with us, and like you get a bunch of other really cool perks for $1. So,
like Collin said, tons of recruiting content, as well as obviously team content. Spring ball is starting up very, very soon. We may have coaching searches coming up. I don't know. Maybe. Who knows? Good time. Good time to jump aboard. And obviously lots of Diamond Sports coverage. It's a fun time over there on the message board. So come join. Sooners Illustrated, $1 right now. Oklahoma.247sports.com. I think that's it. We had a lot of recruiting stuff to get to, obviously, and I think hit most of it. We'll be back next week. Collin and I, of course, on Thursday, as per usual, hit the latest on the recruiting side of things, whatever else there is to get into, football, basketball, whatever else. Back on Monday with Tom and James recapping all the latest in OU sports. It's a busy time. We're entering that nucleus where spring ball starts and basketball's still going, but the Diamond Sports are going, where it's just there's a lot going on. So you'll watch me on the Monday show. That's when we try to kind of get into every sport we can, pretty much. I'm back on Monday with Tom and James, and then Collin and I will get it back going next Thursday, as always, and hit a bunch on the recruiting side. That's it for now. For Collin Kennedy, I'm Josh Callaway. We'll see you next time right back here, as always, on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.